Nurse Elena. Written by Christopher G. Smith. Chapter 1. The Accident. One dark stormy night, Christopher is driving home from work. However, he can barely see the road ahead due to the rain falling in thick sheets. He was going 85 miles per hour when he lost control, veering off the road and crashing into a tree. He blacks out on impact, but luckily for him, first responders came to the scene fairly quickly. They found him bleeding and had several injuries. It was decided he would be taken to hospital by ambulance. After they recovered him from the wreck, he was put on a stretcher immediately and loaded into the ambulance. It didn't take long to get to the hospital. Christopher was swiftly taken to the ICU. Once there, he was placed on a bed and hooked up to the machines. After a while, Christopher woke up and opened his eyes. He looked around the room and saw a nurse sitting on a chair at his bedside. He looks at her and says, "Hello, what's your name?" The nurse looks at him and says, "My name is Elena, and I will be your nurse for the time that you are here." Elena gets up from the chair and gets closer to Christopher's bed and starts to check him over, taking his temperature and the usual stuff that nurses do. Elena takes Christopher's vitals, including his temperature, blood pressure, pulse, and respiratory rate. She checks to make sure that he has no open wounds or serious injuries. She also tests his reflexes and movement and asks him questions about his current condition. Christopher answers her questions and explains that he was involved in a car accident and does not recall how it happened. Elena reassures him that he is safe now and tells him he is being monitored closely by the medical staff. She checks on him periodically throughout the night and makes sure he is comfortable and getting adequate rest. Elena sits with Christopher throughout the night, ensuring that he remains comfortable and has everything he needs. She checks his vitals regularly and monitors for any changes. She also provides emotional support, comforting Christopher and helping him to remain calm. Elena is a dedicated and compassionate nurse, and she remains by Christopher's side until he is healed and ready to be discharged from the hospital. After many days and nights in the hospital, Christopher's condition finally begins to improve. Elena continues to watch over him, providing the care and comfort that he needs. Christopher begins to regain his strength and mobility, and he no longer requires so much medical care. Elena remains at his side and helps him get back on his feet, literally and figuratively. She guides him through the process of physical therapy and ensures that he is progressing in a positive way. However, despite things going well, things were gonna get bad for Elena. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. Elena's Troubles. One day, Elena is with Christopher in his room, helping him with physical therapy exercises. She is encouraging and supportive of him, giving him the motivation to keep going. However, suddenly she starts feeling dizzy and sick. She clutches her forehead and tells Christopher that she does not feel well. She sits down quietly on a chair and closes her eyes, trying to regain her composure. Christopher can see that she is unwell, and he asks her if she is okay. Elena just manages to nod and say that she is fine, but Christopher can tell something is wrong. Not only does she not look good, but she seems to have a mental issue too. As Elena continues to remain with Christopher, she is finding it increasingly difficult to keep her composure. She is visibly shaking and sweating and seems to be having some sort of mental crisis. Christopher is getting worried, and he keeps asking her if she is okay. Elena tries to stay calm and reassure him that she is fine, but the more Christopher presses her, the more she begins to panic. This is definitely not good for either Elena or Christopher. He can tell whatever it is that's going on with her can't be good. The most troubling thing is he hears Elena mutter something about a gun that she's keeping in her desk in the office. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. Kyra intervenes. Kyra is from Canada and a longtime friend of Christopher's older brother. It just happens to be a coincidence that she ended up as a nurse in this hospital. Kyra's day started off as usual. She did a few things around her house and smoked a few bongs before work. However, this is where the ease of her day ends. She gets a call from the hospital and is told that one of the nurses is having a hard time with keeping her sanity and would need help with the workload. Kyra says, "Okay, I'm on it, I'll be there in 15 minutes. She hangs up the phone and quickly heads over to the hospital after changing into her nurse outfit. She got there about 5 minutes late, but she made it. She was immediately told to go to Christopher's room in the ICU. Sometime later, she walks into the room to find Elena holding a pillow over Christopher's face. Kyra yells and screams, "Stop, what do you think you're doing?" Elena drops the pillow and explains herself. She tells Kyra that she is trying to smother Christopher. Kyra's eyes widen as she says, "Whatever, for you can't do that to a patient." Elena then adds, "Well, he said that he loves me very much, but I don't love him in the same way." Kyra says, "I don't care about that, get the hell out of this room now." Elena runs out of the room and runs into the nurse's office and goes to her desk. Kyra checks Christopher and sees he is breathing despite being smothered. She thinks to herself, "If I hadn't came in here when I did, he would be dead now." End of chapter 3. Chapter 4. Elena's downfall. Elena is sitting at her desk thinking about what she did to Christopher. She feels awful about what she did. Her mind just has so much on it, and she can't believe she did that. Elena fidgets with things on her desk, such as paper clips and pens, in an attempt to keep her hands busy while she tries to get her thoughts together, but this isn't useful at all. Her mind is in total darkness now. She then remembers the gun that she had been keeping in the cabinet of her desk. She opens the cabinet and grabs the gun, then rests a finger on the trigger. She thinks about using it and soon after has it pointed against her chest. Elena is really thinking about pulling the trigger. She closes her eyes with her hands trembling, still holding the gun to her chest. Kyra comes into the room so quickly that it startles Elena and causes her to pull the trigger. The gun fires and goes off directly into Elena's chest. She falls off the chair and lands on the floor. Elena is bleeding out while Kyra is standing there screaming, and there's blood pooling on the floor. Kyra hits the panic button on the side of the desk, and a bunch of medical staff rush in and quickly whisk Elena away for surgery. The surgery takes an hour to complete, but they manage to get the bullet out of her. Clearly, it's gonna take a while for this all to heal. Elena is in a deep sleep-like state for the time being. End of chapter 4. Chapter 5. The recovery. Elena wakes up 2 days after her surgery. She looks around the room and realizes she's in the same room as Christopher. Her attention jumps to him for a minute before a loud beep, the life sign machine, sounds. She figures the beep must indicate that she has awoken. Kyra comes into the room and walks up to the foot of Elena's bed. Kyra starts to check her over, taking her temperature and the usual stuff that nurses do. Kyra takes Elena's vitals, including her temperature, blood pressure, pulse, and respiratory rate. Elena seems to be doing very well despite all that happened. "You've recovered very nicely, my dear, but we'll keep you in bed for a week for observation," says Kyra. Kyra then turns to Christopher and informs him that he's being discharged and he can go back to his grave digging job. Christopher gets up and says his goodbyes to Elena and Kyra. Kyra shows Christopher the way out of the ICU before going to Elena. When she got back, Elena was fast asleep. Kyra shrugged her arms and left her alone. "After all, I know how hard it is to sleep in a hospital." That night, Elena's mind slipped into a nightmare. She dreamed that her right eye was missing and that her glasses were broken. What really got her attention about this dream was her best friend James was also in the dream and was acting rather violent. However, she woke up before the dream could finish. She awoke and laughed off the dream. End of chapter 5. Chapter 6. Final end and death of Elena. It was a week later, and Elena was looking forward to being discharged from the ICU. Kyra came into the room to check on Elena. She saw that Elena was awake and looking the best she had in days. Kyra goes up to Elena. "Is there anything I can get you?" Elena asks if it's okay if she calls a friend. Kyra agrees and hands Elena the phone from the nightstand. Elena dials the phone and calls James. James answers the phone. Elena informs him that she had gotten hurt at work and today was her last day of recovery. James asks if he can come to the ICU and visit her. Elena agrees and told him to come around noon to see her. They hang up from the call. Elena tells Kyra that her friend James is coming to see her. Kyra smiles and leaves the room. A few hours passed and James was at the ICU. He checked himself in and went to Elena's room. He got to the room and Elena smiled as she was glad to see him. They got to talking, but the conversation turned sour and violent. James pulled out a small pointy knife from his back pocket. He showed it to Elena. Elena looked at it and said, "Oh, come on, James, this argument isn't that serious. Let's not do anything that we'll regret later." But James had made up his mind. Elena screamed as he jabbed her in the eye with the knife. Once the knife was in her eye, he twisted it all around, then pulled out of the socket with a loud popping, snapping sound. The eyeball slid off the blade and fell to the ground. There was blood running down the right side of Elena's face. Surely she wasn't gonna make it out this one. By this point, Kyra was coming into the room to check on Elena's, inspected all to be well. Unfortunately, she could see that all was not well, and James took one look at Kyra and ran out of the room and kept running. Kyra thought of running after him, but decided to go over to Elena's side instead. Kyra screamed as she looked at the blood and the damage done to Elena's face. She could see that Elena was dying from all the blood loss, and it was too late to save her. Minutes later, Elena flatlined. Kyra grabbed the chart and wrote the time of death, 12:32 p.m., then went to the phone and called Christopher and told him that Elena is dead and is missing one of her eyes. They talked for a bit before hanging up and getting back to their lives. The end. Note this story is connected to my previous story, Elena and the Gravedigger. This story was written as a backstory for it.
Stay tuned to see what comes down the line.